On a cold, snowy evening, James, once a rising star in the world of horses, found himself at rock bottom. He had lost everything: his family ranch, his fortune, and the stallion that once meant more to him than life itself. Now homeless and forgotten, fate led him to an auction where he came face to face with Ghost, the horse that should never have been taken from him. But winning Ghost back would not be easy. A powerful ranch owner had set a challenge: prove that James was still the rider he once was, or lose Ghost forever amid ruthless rivals, buried betrayals, and a high-stakes competition. Before the story unfolds further, the video invites viewers to comment on where they're watching from, like the video, and subscribe, because every bit of support inspires more impactful stories. Outside, the winter wind howled through the valley, carrying flurries of snow that danced in the fading afternoon light. The landscape had transformed into a frozen sea of white. Skeletal trees shivered beneath their icy coats. A luxurious SUV trudged along the snow-covered roads, its heated leather seats offering a stark contrast to the frigid world beyond. Inside the vehicle, Lila, James's estranged daughter, sat in silence. Her hands were buried deep in the pockets of her oversized red parka as her gaze remained fixed on the frost-covered window. James, gripping the steering wheel tightly, scanned the winding road ahead with his sharp blue eyes. Now in his late 40s, his once jet-black hair had begun to silver at the temples. Although his clean-shaven face showed lines of fatigue, his tailored wool coat and polished leather gloves spoke of a man who had once enjoyed great comfort. "I know this is all a big change for you," James began in a measured, tentative tone. Yet Lila offered no reply. Her breath fogged the glass as she leaned her forehead against the cold window. She had heard his apologies before, apologies that had lost their weight somewhere along the way. As they rounded a bend, Lila suddenly spotted a shadow against the snowy whiteness. "Dad, stop!" she shouted, startling James into slamming the brakes. The SUV skidded slightly before coming to a halt. Alarmed, James looked out, and Lila pointed urgently to the roadside. Tied to a leaning wooden post stood a horse, or rather, what remained of one. The animal was thin and frail. Its chestnut coat was matted with frost, patches of fur clumped together, and its legs trembled as though half buried in the snow. A crudely scrawled sign dangled from the post: "Free to a good home." James sighed and pinched the bridge of his nose. "This is not our problem, Lila. We can't just leave it here," he said in a low voice. But Lila's urgency could not be ignored. "Dad, we have to take her," she insisted, her voice rising with a mix of compassion and determination. Without waiting for further protest, she threw open the car door and stepped into the biting cold. Her boots crunched on the fresh snow as she strode toward the suffering horse. Up close, the condition of the mare was even worse than they had feared. Her ribs protruded sharply, like brittle fence posts, and her shallow, labored breathing testified to the harsh winter's cruelty. Yet, in her large, dark eyes filled with quiet suffering, Lila saw a mirror of her own feelings of abandonment and loss. She knelt in the snow, reaching out a trembling, gloved hand. "Hey girl," she whispered, her voice catching with emotion, "it's okay." The horse flicked its ear, but did not move. In that moment, Lila felt an ache she couldn't quite explain. Memories of nights spent crying into her pillow, wondering why her father had always chosen his business over her and her mother. James, watching from a short distance, hesitated as he observed the frailty before him. "Lila, this horse," he started, searching for the right words. "She's not something we can really take on right now." But Lila's eyes burned with urgency. "You mean you can't?" she snapped, her tone trembling with hurt. "You abandoned me that way once, Dad." The accusation hit James like a blow, and for a long moment, he was speechless. The only sound was the wind carrying the soft, labored breath of the mare, a sound that seemed to echo the weight of the past and the fragility of hope. After a heavy silence, James slowly rose and pulled out his phone. "I'll call Tom," he said, his voice low. "Maybe he can help us bring her home." Lila's eyes widened with disbelief, and though her heart pounded with uncertainty, she nodded. "Let's do it," she agreed softly, her tone mixing desperation with determination. The drive from that moment on was cloaked in silence, punctuated only by the occasional snort from the trailer hitched to the back of the SUV. Through the rear window, Lila stole glances at the mare, each look a quiet promise that maybe, just maybe, this small act of compassion would heal old wounds. As the SUV made its way toward the Warren estate, once the symbol of James's family glory, memories of a better past flooded his mind. He recalled a time when his father's name commanded respect in the world of horses, and when every auction was a stage for pride and honor. Now, facing the auction of Ghost, the very horse that embodied his father's legacy, James's heart pounded with both trepidation and a longing to reclaim what he had lost. The next afternoon, James found himself pacing restlessly inside the barn, the steady drip of melting snow and the soft crunch of frost underfoot echoing his inner turmoil. Outside, snowflakes drifted lazily, each one a quiet reminder of the relentless winter that had changed everything. Soon, his oldest friend, Tom, arrived. With a weathered smile etched onto his face, Tom surveyed the barn with a practiced eye. "She's looking good," he remarked as he glanced at Willow, the mare now sheltered in the barn. Lila, who had been tending to the horse with unwavering determination, nodded in agreement. James admitted, "I've been trying my best, Tom, helping where I can, but sometimes it feels like she doesn't trust me." Tom leaned casually against the stall door, his arms folded. "Trust isn't built overnight, James, especially when it's been broken for so long. You need to show up for her every single day. This isn't about fixing something by force. It's about caring for her like she's your closest partner." His tone was blunt but caring, cutting through the weight of years lost. At that moment, Lila entered the barn silently. Her boots made almost no sound on the straw-covered floor, and she paused when she heard her father's soft confession, "I just want her to know I'm here." Lila's eyes, a mixture of hurt and hope, flickered toward the stall. "You want to prove it to her, right?" Tom prodded gently. "Show her she matters more than just business to you." James's face tightened as he swallowed hard. "I know it sounds simple," he murmured, "but I'm not used to caring like this. It's not something you can negotiate away." Tom's words, filled with hard-earned wisdom, resonated with James. "It's not about making a deal, James. It's about genuine care, about showing her you're here for the right reasons." The next morning, to Lila's surprise, James was the first to arrive at the barn. Gone were the crisp, immaculate boots of his past. Instead, he wore an old sweater and scuffed jeans, symbols of his new, earnest approach. "Morning," he said softly as Lila entered, her brow furrowing in cautious curiosity. "I thought I'd get a head start today." James moved deliberately toward Willow's stall, carefully scooping feed into a bucket. His movements were awkward at first, betraying years of habit from a life of boardrooms rather than barn work. Yet, as he worked, he began to ask questions about Willow's care, listening intently to Lila's instructions. He even laughed at himself when he spilled water on his boots for the first time in months. In those small, clumsy moments, Lila saw a fragile spark of hope. Perhaps her father was beginning to learn the language of care, a language that might one day heal old wounds. As the day wore on, James and Lila worked together in the barn, side by side. The silence between them was punctuated by Willow's occasional soft snorts and the distant call of a bird outside. Finally, unable to contain herself any longer, Lila spoke softly, "You're really trying, aren't you?" James met her gaze, his eyes steady. "I am," he replied, a small smile tugging at his lips despite the uncertainty in his heart. Their shared labor forged a tentative bond, each task, each word of instruction, slowly stitching together the broken seams of their past. Later that afternoon, they stepped outside into the Warren estate's snowy fields. The barn door creaked open as James led Willow out by her halter, with Lila trailing close in her red parka. This was Willow's first walk since she had been rescued. At first, her steps were hesitant, her legs trembled as if testing the limits of their strength. "Take it slow," Lila advised softly, her hazel eyes fixed on the mare. James nodded, his voice a quiet murmur, "She's doing better than I thought." Even though his tone betrayed his lingering worries, every cautious step built a fragile bridge of trust. They made their way toward an open field, the crunch of snow underfoot and the rhythmic patter of Willow's hooves setting a steady cadence. At one point, Lila offered a small treat, a slice of apple, to see if Willow would accept it. James hesitated before extending the apple, and after a quiet moment, Willow's soft lips brushed against his palm as she took it. "See," Lila teased gently. "She's starting to trust you." For a brief moment, James felt a glimmer of relief, a tiny ember of hope that maybe, just maybe, their efforts were not in vain. As the day drew to a close, the light softened, and the fields took on a warm, golden hue. Standing together on the edge of the field, Lila confided, "I used to come here with Mom. This spot was perfect for watching the sunrise." James's heart tightened at the memory, and he admitted, "Maybe I thought staying away would hurt less, but I see now that being here matters." In that quiet moment, the tension of past regrets gave way to the possibility of healing, a slow, steady beat of hope that pulsed through them both. That evening, as the estate settled into a hushed calm, James returned to his study, a room once filled with trophies and grand expectations now feeling hollow and distant. Surrounded by polished wood paneling and leather furnishings, he stared out at the snow-covered grounds, the familiar opulence of his past clashing with the emptiness he now felt. In that reflective solitude, memories of the races, the long-forgotten cheers, and the crushing pressure of profit began to fade. Instead, the lessons of care, of connection, and of honoring life's true value came flooding back. "I've always chased winning," James confessed quietly to himself, his voice heavy with regret. "We trained the fastest horses, entered the biggest races, and brought home trophies. But that success cost me everything." His eyes narrowed as he recalled the sacrifices made along the way. Slowly, with a deep exhale, he continued, "I've come to realize that horses aren't merely tools for profit. They are partners, athletes, and companions. They deserve more than ruthless competition. They deserve compassion and care." His words, spoken into the stillness of his study, carried the weight of years of ambition and loss. Then, with renewed conviction, he announced to his small audience of memories and silent hopes, "Starting today, Warren Racing will be restructured. We're launching a program to rehabilitate retired racehorses, giving them a second chance at life beyond the track. We will work with trainers who prioritize humane practices over mere performance." Murmurs of surprise and skepticism had once echoed in boardrooms, but now, in the quiet of his study, James believed that doing the right thing had a value beyond dollars. At that moment, his resolve solidified, and he knew he was willing to take that risk, even if it meant alienating investors who measured success only by profits. After a long meeting later that day, where he addressed a small group of local trainers and investors about his new vision, James found a moment alone with Lila on the porch. The fading light painted the estate in soft hues of pink and gold. "Do you think Mom would have been proud of us?" Lila asked quietly, her voice blending nostalgia with tentative hope. James gazed across the paddocks where Willow grazed peacefully. "I believe she would have been proud," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. In that moment, the weight of past regrets began to lift, replaced by a sense of purpose that transcended the old ways of business. The following day brought an unexpected invitation, a formal letter from the National Equestrian League, congratulating James on his recent performance and inviting him to compete at a prestigious event. Opening the envelope, his pulse quickened as he read the crisp, formal words. The invitation validated everything he and Willow had endured together, yet it also filled him with apprehension. This was no longer a local race, it was the big leagues, where every competitor was a seasoned professional and every misstep could be magnified. Even so, when Lila later joined him in the barn, her presence a calming influence amid the cold, desolate expanse of the estate, James felt a shift within him. Together, they watched Willow, now slowly regaining strength and grace, and began to talk of possibilities. "Maybe it isn't just about racing," James said softly, "but about giving these horses the care they deserve." Lila's eyes, which had once been guarded with resentment, softened with understanding. "I want that too," she admitted quietly. Their conversation was a gentle bridge spanning years of distance, connecting them through shared hope and determination. Later that evening, as they sat down for a modest dinner in the renovated carriage house, James and Lila reviewed old photographs and clippings from better days. The conversation turned to dreams of a new future, one where the focus was not on trophies and profits, but on the welfare of the horses and the healing of their fractured family. "It's about building a legacy of care," James said, his voice resonant with newfound sincerity. "Not just for the horses, but for us, for our family." In that moment, amid laughter and quiet reflection, James felt the first true stirrings of redemption, a promise that even the deepest wounds might one day heal. The next morning, as the estate awoke under a pale winter sun, James found Lila already at the barn, meticulously wrapping Willow's legs with fresh bandages. "Hey," he greeted softly, leaning against the stall door. Lila looked up, her hazel eyes reflecting both surprise and cautious optimism. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her tone gentle yet edged with skepticism. "I'm starting today," James replied, his voice steadier than before, though his heart still pounded with uncertainty. Over the following days, James and Lila worked side by side in the barn, a quiet transformation unfolding between them. James traded his polished business attire for practical clothes, a worn sweater, jeans, and scuffed boots. He mended fences, filled feed buckets, and learned the intricacies of caring for Willow, whose condition was slowly improving. At first, his movements were clumsy and uncertain, but with every task he performed, he grew a little more confident. Lila watched him closely. Sometimes she would tease, "You're going to spoil her if you're not careful," but her tone was affectionate rather than harsh. One particularly cold afternoon, after a tense exchange about Willow's feeding schedule, James reached out for a call to his oldest friend, Tom Harris, a former trainer who had always known how to cut through James's stubborn pride. "I need your help," James said, his voice heavy with regret and longing. Tom's gruff reply, tinged with both amusement and wisdom, offered a simple solution: "Bring her by tomorrow, and we'll figure it out." That call marked a turning point. Over the next week, James approached every chore not as a duty, but as a step toward rebuilding trust, with Willow and, more importantly, with Lila. Even as the Warren estate began to stir with new life, trainers, young riders, and visitors slowly arriving, the true transformation was taking place inside the barn. One morning, as the snow glistened on the expansive fields, James led Willow out for her first walk. The barn door creaked open, and with Lila following closely in her favorite red parka, he guided Willow along the quiet, snowy path. At first, the mare's steps were hesitant, her legs trembling in the crisp air. "Take it slow," Lila advised softly, her voice warm with encouragement. James kept his grip firm yet gentle, his eyes occasionally flicking to Lila for reassurance. In a quiet moment along the path, Lila handed James a small treat, a slice of apple, to offer Willow. James hesitated, then extended the treat. For a brief moment, Willow's soft lips brushed his hand as she accepted the offering, and a small, genuine smile spread across Lila's face. "She's beginning to trust you," she said, and in that tender exchange, James felt a glimmer of hope, a promise that their efforts were not in vain. As the day progressed, the estate's atmosphere transformed. The expansive snowy fields that once echoed with silence now buzzed with the activity of young riders practicing, trainers giving gentle instructions, and visitors marveling at the rehabilitated horses. The Warren estate was evolving into a sanctuary, a place where success was redefined not by trophies or profit margins, but by compassion, resilience, and the power of second chances. That evening, after a long day of shared labor and quiet victories, James sat in his study with a steaming cup of coffee, staring out at the snow-covered paddocks. The familiar comforts of his once proud estate now seemed to hold a new meaning, a promise of renewal. He looked down at the neatly organized equipment in the barn and reflected on the transformation taking place not only in Willow but in himself. The rigid, profit-driven mindset that had once defined him was slowly melting away, replaced by a deep, personal commitment to care for the horses and heal old wounds. Later, as night fell and the estate's lights cast a warm glow over the snowy landscape, James and Lila found a quiet moment together on the porch. They spoke in hushed tones about the future, about how the changes in the business could bring healing to their fractured relationship. "Maybe it's not just about racing anymore," James confessed softly, "but about building something lasting, a legacy of care for the horses and for our family." Lila nodded, her eyes bright with a mixture of hope and caution. "I want that, Dad," she replied. "I want us to be more than just a business, a family that cares." As the conversation faded into a comfortable silence, James felt a stirring of peace. The estate, once a symbol of cold ambition, was slowly being transformed into a haven of connection and hope. The quiet murmur of the wind and the soft nicker of Willow in the paddock became the soundtrack of a new beginning, a future where every small act of kindness rebuilt the bridges that had once been burned. Thank you for joining us on this transformative journey. If you've been inspired by James, Lila, and Willow's story of redemption and renewal, please subscribe to Thunder Hoofbeats for more captivating tales of hope and transformation. Like, share, and stay tuned. There's always another chapter waiting to unfold.